you remember a few months ago, this is probably several months ago, when Al Gore was at a World Economic Forum event. We talked about it on this podcast. And he was complaining about the idea of corporations greenwashing or something, that they would agree to doing some climate change effort, but in reality they wouldn't do it. And he talked about greenwashing, and then his plan to dealing with that was this thing called a program called Climate Trace. So Climate Trace was essentially a global network of satellites that were going to monitor CO2 emissions from all different corporations and pinpoint what corporations and companies and industries were releasing what amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, so that those people would be able to be held accountable. So that was an idea that he had. It actually happened. I don't think anyone ever talked about it, but it happened. It's called Climate Trace. It's active right now. So all of these different things are just showing how technology is being used to really enforce this ESG stuff, no matter what happens. And now I'm reading from this Forbes article that's titled, "Are You Ready for an AI-Driven Radical ESG Transparency?" So the author of this article talks about ChatGPT, another thing that we've talked about on this podcast, and how people are using ChatGPT and AI-like technologies to enforce different climate stuff. So reading from the article, it says, AI tools for sustainability and ESG transparency are multiplying before our eyes. Chat IPCC can converse about climate science using the latest and most authoritative scientific papers as its data input. Clarity AI digs around in companies' sustainability data and shares back simple graphics and reports. Greenwatch AI compares companies' green claims against their actual carbon emissions, and Climate BERT fact checks climate-related claims and can be used by governments to detect greenwashing. So basically, this article is explaining how ChatGPT technology can soon, and in some cases right now, pull up live data on your company or any corporation's climate impact, carbon footprint, water usage, supply chain info, whether or not you pay fair wages, anything. And this is massively supercharged version of what Justin was describing earlier with the ESG predictor score or whatever. So Justin, I thought this article was unbelievable. What do you think about it?
Yeah, this is incredible stuff. I mean, you and I have been working on a book with Glenn that's going to be coming out in July. Glenn Beck, called Dark Future. And in Dark Future, we actually talk about some of this stuff, not all these companies, but this general concept. And we talk about all sorts of other uses for AI and how that relates to ESG. And there's a ton of things that are out there. But this is the future. This and the Moody Analytics and all sorts of other, this is the future of how all these things are going to, all these reports, all these government decisions, all this stuff is going to be made based on AI produced reports. And tracking using satellites and doing all sorts of other things. Just wait until you have smart cities. Just wait till you have smart cities and you have cameras on every corner watching everything that you're doing, knowing every time you're filling up at the pump, like all this information. See, in the past, and this is why AI is so important. This is just really a fundamental thing for people to understand going forward into the future. In the past, there's been lots of data for a while now. For a couple of decades, there's been tons and tons and tons of data being collected all over the place. Everything that you do on the internet is being collected somewhere, okay? Almost everything you do. And much of what you do in your life, the financial decisions you make, walking down the street, a lot of that stuff is actually, in some sense, collected somewhere, okay? But we've never really had the technology to take that data and use it and understand it and manipulate it. And it's just because we haven't had machines capable of doing that. We either couldn't process it, or we didn't have the manpower to actually comb through the data and make sense of it. And so policymakers and governments, they've had all this data, they've had access to it, private companies have had access to it, but they just can't really use it in a lot of advanced ways. Advertising was really one of the most advanced ways that this data is being used on a day-to-day basis. Social media and stuff like that also uses it, right? But now that we have more advanced forms of AI, we're starting to develop supercomputers and quantum computers that are capable of running really advanced algorithms and really and combing through massive amounts of data. what you're going to see is more and more of that data is going to be used to target individuals, to target groups, to target people, to craft policies, to make decisions. All of this stuff is going to happen at a level that we've never seen before. The interaction between machines and policymaking is going to be the issue of the next 100 years. It really is, because of how powerful these machines are. And the more powerful they get, and they're going to keep getting more powerful, and the more data you feed it, which they're then going to learn from and become even more better at predicting the future and determining the best policies for things, the more control human beings are going to give these machines in our decision making. And that is a really, really scary thought. We're just on the edge of it. And climate change is a huge part of all that, right? Because now you know exactly what your neighbor is, how much your carbon footprint is for your neighbor. And you know exactly how much that business down the street is using. And you have the ability to run algorithms to predict what people will do under a bunch of different climate scenarios and all sorts of other stuff. And it doesn't mean that they're necessarily accurate. That's not the point. The point is it's going to give people the belief that there's an accuracy there. And that's what this, we're just seeing the early stages of it. This is just the start, but it's going to be going to be the biggest issue over the next century for sure.
Jim, you told me earlier this week, or maybe it was last week, that Black Mirror was coming out with a new season.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're going to even be able to top what's really going on just now. Like, it usually predicts the technology of the future, but this stuff is scary enough as it is. What do you think?
Well, I mean, isn't it interesting that the only road to social utopia requires absolute surveillance of every aspect of your life? Without surveilling and knowing everything you do at all times, unless we have that kind of access to your life, we will never get to our socialist utopia. Gary had asked in the comments earlier, he said, how are they measuring emissions? Your emissions. And when I saw that, I was like, do you think that actually matters? Do you think it actually matters how they're going to measure emissions? They'll just tell you what your emissions are. If you could figure out a way to accurately calculate and show it scientifically, accurately calculate your own emissions that you're actually responsible for, do you think you'd be able to replace the data the government is telling you that what your emissions are? Do you think they let you do that? Of course not. If you believe that, you believe Al Gore is actually very soon going to move out of one of his 20,000 square foot homes and start living, that low carbon life that he wants for everybody else. That's the thing that is super scary about this stuff. Is, with artificial intelligence, it's not the technology itself, it's how it's being put to use. And it's being put to use to take away our liberty and our freedoms and to rule us and to herd us into categories in which we cannot escape. Everything that is happening right now through from ESG to central bank backed digital currencies to this sort of thing is all designed to control you, to take away your freedom and your liberty. And that's what's so scary about it. In Black Mirror, in the show Black Mirror, there was at least a conceit that the people that was kind of one of the points that Charlie Brooker, who created the show, was Black Mirror is the face of your cell phone. That's what the Black Mirror is. And there was always this idea that what he was worried is that humanity would voluntarily give themselves up to this kind of surveillance. We're not going to have that choice. It is just going to happen. These governments and these powerful entities around the globe are going to be using this technology to control you without you ever giving your consent to that. That's what's really scary about what's happening right now.
This reminds me a lot of after September 11th, when the Patriot Act was passed and the NSA started gobbling up all people's text messages, phone calls, everything they were doing on their keyboard, everything. But what the problem was back then was they didn't have enough analysts to comb through all that data. There was just way too much of it. So I am worried, because if they do have quantum computing, supercomputing, and AI technology that can comb through these things and just instantly pinpoint, red flag there, this guy Google searched blank too many times, he's a problem. It's endless. And I think that AI, quantum computing, and supercomputing do give them the ability to set up this just massive data surveillance state that they love to do. And I think that a lot of this is predicated on what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. And I think that the Chinese Communist Party is doing it. And a lot of American politicians, Joe Biden in particular, looks at that and says, I kind of like that road. I kind of want to go down that road. I want nothing to do with that road. And I do think that most Americans want nothing to do with that road. So I think this is something that is just going to have to be hashed out, in the future. But I think that the more and more people realize that these technologies definitely have, a good side, but they also have a dark side, that the, American people need to understand that. And we need to, make sure that we are not letting, politicians and, technocrats abuse these technologies and, letting them use it to put us under their thumb even more than we already are.